Here we go with the second half. And for those who may have got in late, I just wanted to repeat that I'm you won't have to take notes on this because I'll be putting the presentation up on the web page and the video too. I'll load that up of the whole presentation. I'm recording it right now. So let's look at density altitude. So density altitude, it's insidious, easy to overlook. Not so much out here in our elevation, but you get a lot of flatlanders and stuff, and they're not really familiar with leaning or knowing much about density altitude. It's a factor in many accidents, especially in the backcountry, not recognizing density altitude, setting the mixture properly for your maximum performance on takeoff, and then landing. One of the questions when I did these presentations a couple years ago is someone asked, well, how do you set your mixture if you're on it? You're not going to be doing a run up, or you shouldn't be doing a run up on gravel or something once you landed. How do you set your mixture? And my answer to that is, know where your mixture is, say when you're coming into land or at a certain altitude, what your power setting is and where your mixture is, what your EGT reads, and then just get that mixture set pretty close to where it would be at that equivalent density altitude, and you're going to be pretty close. I mean, you may not be exactly perfect, but you'll be a lot better than like at full rich. So here's some examples of high density altitude. What's going to happen? Of course, you're going to get a reduction in engine horsepower. Your takeoffs are going to be longer. Your landing rolls are going to be longer. Definitely get a decreased climb performance, and your true airspeed increases. So as far as true airspeed, that's going to increase your turn radius. It's going to, as you're landing, your perception of speed, because you're going to be coming in at a higher, say, ground speed, even though your airspeed would be the same for landing. Your ground speed is going to be, your indicated airspeed is going to be the same. Your true airspeed is going to be higher. So your perception is that you're coming in faster, which you are, but you need to watch your indicated airspeed. So a normally aspirated engine loses about 3% for every 1,000 foot in density altitude. So a 230 horse 182 at 6,000 feet density altitude would produce 188 horsepower at 9,000 feet, 170. And that doesn't account for the prop efficiency loss, nor the wing loss in lift. So that same density altitude, say at Smiley Creek at 7,200 feet on a 70-degree day, the density altitudes would be close to 10,000 feet. So your 230 horse 182 becomes a 160 horse, well, not a 172, because you're going to have a heavier plane, so it's even worse than if you had a 172 at sea level. Smiley Creek is one that, where density altitude, I guess, comes alive, or you realize what density altitude is all about. Because at that altitude, you feel it. I remember the first time I went in a backcountry class in a 182, and it was a fairly cool day. It wasn't this hot. I don't know what the temperature was, but it was probably in the mid 50s or so, because it was in the morning. and relatively lightly loaded with fuel and just me and the instructor. And when I put the throttle in to get going, it's like, whoa, we're not moving very fast. And yeah, I mean, we got off the ground okay and cleared everything okay, but that's when you really, I guess, density altitude first hit me, and I know other people I've talked to too, that that's when you realize what density altitude is all about. Then AOPA Air Safety has a really good little video, a little about, I guess it's 4 minutes or so, on density altitude. Okay, now we're going to look at a accident that I know some of you've seen before. This has been well, it's 2012 when this has happened, so I've showed this this video in the last several presentations, but it's always good to look at it again. And for those who haven't seen it, it's pretty eye-opening, I guess. Even a non-pilot watching this wonders, what in the heck is this guy thinking? But here it is, 165 horse Stinson, which is pretty close as far as the weight capacity, gross weight, to a 172. 2 o'clock in the afternoon on in June, the middle of summer, and there's 3 people on board. The density altitude, according to the McCall ASOS at that time, with what the pressure is and the temperature, works out to be just a little over 9,000 feet. So that 160 horsepower Stinson becomes 120 horsepower. So as we watch the video, think about, okay, what could this guy have done while he's still on the runway? What could he have done once he's in the air for the second time? What could he have done before he crashed? And the other thing is, I paused the video just so you can see that his mixture was full rich. Okay, right there you can see his mixture's full rich. So pretty soon you'll see these markers on the runway, the 1/3 marker and the 2/3 marker, 2/3 marker on the runway. So we're coming up here pretty soon on the first third. And there it is right there. So it's just off the ground, maybe in ground effect, but now he's back. So I'm not flying. There's this. That's the 2/3 mark. So we're running out of runway, and we're probably still barely in ground, and we're not climbing. So there's the end of the runway. Now the terrain is up here and heading out to the west, like he is going from Bruce Meadows. It's rising slightly, and he is barely out climbing the terrain. So he's still got some some green grass there. He hasn't got to the trees yet. Probably could still put it down, I don't think he could probably turn around because with that start bank, and you're going to lose lift even more. And he's not really barely up climbing the terrain, if at all. Now we're over the trees and really don't have too many options. Maybe try to turn back in a real gentle bank, but I guess he thinks he's gonna maybe outclimb the trees. And we go into slow motion, and you can see that did not happen. He didn't outclimb the trees. So fortunately, no one was killed in this accident. The pilot was injured pretty good. This is on YouTube still, I believe. And the YouTube, they continue, and the passengers are able to get the pilot braced up on a log and start getting him treated. And I'm not sure how they got out, if they had cell phones, but the passengers were relatively unhurt, and nobody died. But so here's the NTSB report: probable cause, pilots inadequate pre-flight planning, decision to take off at density altitude outside the airplane's performance envelope. And it says with a 10-knot tailwind, so I didn't pick that up in the ASOS report from McCall, but I'm not sure how they determined that. I don't remember seeing the windsock as he passed it. But in any case, that which may have accounted for him getting off the ground, then back on the ground again. But clearly, he didn't take any action once he knew he wasn't flying well. So again, in the live presentation, we'll ask people, well, what could he have done before takeoff? Well, one thing, of course, hey, let a couple passengers out, and maybe just take one passenger and shuttle back to probably Cascade would be the closest, and refuel and come back and get the next guy and then take him back, or maybe take two of them back. But I would start out with just one and leave two guys there and shuttle them back and forth. Definitely that would be one thing. The other thing is to wait, till it cools off, and then while taking off, he could have, well, once you realize you're not taking off, pull the power and stop, and then figure out something. And then once in the air, again, he had plenty of time to land in a pasture or something. Probably would have been better off than crashing in the trees. But so I guess about the only thing he did right, from what I could tell, was that at least he kept flying the plane even into the trees, and instead of trying to pull it up and stall maybe, and then stalling into the trees. So lessons learned is, hopefully, people remember this, and if you ever get into a situation like this, you'll take proactive action and not get in this situation. But anyway, so here's some rules of thumb, and these were, came about just from general studies in different books and stuff. Some from Sparky Iverson, some from Amy Hoover and other places. Don't fly in the mountains with the winds aloft in excess of 25 knots, because as you saw earlier, that could create up to 2,000 foot downdraft. And with less experience, even less winds. In general, plan to arrive and depart by 10 a.m. especially in in the summertime. When it's getting up into in the mountains up into the 80s or 90s, and in Boise, even in Boise in the 80s and 90s or higher. But yeah, generally try to arrive or depart by 10 a.m. or later in the evening when the winds calm down and the temperatures are cooler. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Sometimes you might stay calm a little bit longer than that, and other times it may start getting turbulent even before that. Always have an out. So in your route planning and as you're flying along, always have an out. A lot of times there'll be areas where you can, if you plan your route right, you might be over a Forest Service road, or you might be over a meadows, or someplace where you can put it down if you lost an engine or something, and be able to land safely. Be able to turn to lowering terrain. So always be able to turn to lowering terrain. Be able to do a 180 if you need to. In emergencies, always have a landing area in mind, which we kind of talked about just a minute ago. So in your route planning, plan your routes so you have the most opportunity to land, if there's an emergency. Just like when you're planning a regular cross-country flight. And then in your canyons, you want to be able to do a 180 in half the canyon width. And a little bit later, we'll look at that. The 80-20 rule, 80 knots, 20 degrees of flaps. And say another plane, say like 172, it might be 70 knots and 20 degrees of flaps, or maybe 15 degrees of flaps. But, get slowed down, well above stall, but just slow things down, have time to think or to assess the situation. 50% takeoff rule. So if you're not at 75% of rotate indicated airspeed at 50% of the runway, abort. And I like to be actually in the air, not at indicated rotate speed, but actually in the air by 50% of the runway. And there's been a few times where I've had to do that, where I'll walk to runway and find something, at 50% of the runway length, and then as I'm taking off, either myself or have the passenger, point out, okay, we're not off the ground yet, and we just passed the 50% mark, so pull the power, get on the brakes, and you should be able to stop by the end of the runway. Approaching ridges at a 45-degree angle before crossing, and be at least 2,000 feet above the ridge in turbulence. So that gives you an opportunity. So if you're coming across the ridge, instead of going directly towards it and then doing a 180, if you're on an angle, then all you have to do is a 90-degree turn to turn away if you, say, start getting into a downdraft. If you're flying over the mountains, instead of going through the canyons, get 1,500, 2,000 feet AGL over the mountains, especially in turbulence. If it's fairly calm, then you can be a little bit lower than that. In the conventions, in the canyons, the convention is to fly on the right side. So that's because, well, two reasons. One, you can do a 180 and half the canyon width ideally, or even less, but you can do a 180 if you find out you're going up the wrong canyon. And the other reason is, people coming the other direction, the way some of these canyons, snake around left and right, and a lot of turns and stuff, then a plane coming the other direction at the same altitude, you'll be just like driving, down the road on a right-hand rule. So generally land upriver and take off downriver. Some of these airstrips along the rivers, you can tell relatively if they're sloped much or not. If the river's fairly calm and the calm water along the runway, then it's probably pretty level. But if there's a rapids, then that indicates that the runway's probably, if the river runway follows the river, it's probably sloped. So, but still, as a general rule, land upriver and take off downriver, so that when you're taking off, you're taking off downriver. The river's dropping down, and you're not going. It's not raising. If you take off upriver, you're going to be going into higher rising terrain. Probably not real steep, but still, nevertheless, rising terrain. And always communicate your position frequently on 122.9. Call out other airports. People like on the Middle Fork will call out different drainages. They're over Camas Creek, or they're crossing Loon Creek, or they're crossing another airport. So call out your positions, especially in the canyons. Bill Woods, some early, is one of the early backcountry pilot, and he had some rules. Don't make power off approaches. And so the reason for that is if you're coming in, say, landing over the river, and maybe get a downdraft where you have to add power. Well, if you have power all the way off and you go to add power, you might get some hesitation and that power coming back right away. Whereas if you have some power in, then you can make those power adjustments, just make slight adjustments, and that will take care of your, whether or not you're, losing altitude or gaining altitude. But if you come in with a power off approach, you really, don't have much of an option than if you say you're coming in and you need to reduce power because you're coming in too high, then that gives you some more options. So in the, like in the 172 or in the 182s, be coming in on the 182s, 12 inches of manifold pressure, somewhere around there. On the 182s, 172s, 1500, 1600 RPM, versus, full idle. Don't drag in low and slow. Don't go out of sight of the strip. So if you're dragging it in, you're maybe getting close to getting behind a power curve, and definitely you don't want to do that and have a chance of stalling. Or again, if you're coming in low and slow and you need to add some power to climb, you may not be able to add enough power to climb quick enough. Just like if you're in slow flight, sometimes you add full power, and when you're going low and slow, and you're not going to gain any altitude if you need it. If you find turbulent air in the canyons, go home. This is the type of air that has no respect for you, regardless of your experience and ability. And as we looked at in the weather part, some of the you get the canyon winds, and then the thermal winds, and then you get canyons converging. That's like in a river, tributaries coming into the river and creating a lot of turbulence when they come together. And the same thing happens in the air, and it can get really, really turbulent sometimes in the afternoon. You don't want to be flying in that. If the air is bad, have a tailwind, wait it out. And so we'll see later on some takeoffs with tailwind where they should have waited it out. Don't take chances and don't get rattled. So that's pretty straightforward common sense. And then you have a few more. Be sure you can set your airplane down on a 50-foot spot. Not once in a while, but every time. So that doesn't mean that necessarily you have to land right at the end of the runway. In fact, most cases you can see where people land by the you know, the dirt on the runway or the bare spots, and you know that's where you want to put it down. And so you want to be able to put it down at the place that you want to land. Boy, there was a bad accident last year at Sulphur Creek where a guy came in and he didn't touch down until almost at the lodge. I mean, you're talking about past halfway, more than halfway past the runway, and he tried to do a go around and then hit another plane and crashed into the trees, and the plane caught on fire, and they were able to get him out. But you know, you need to be able to hit the spot and be able to do that in different conditions. Fly the airplane every second. Don't let it fly you. In this territory, a mistake is often synonymous with fatality. Then another early backcountry pilot, Bob Johnson's out of Missoula, never quit flying the plane, even in the treetops. Fly the biggest piece down, and if you can still fly it. Then Wilbur Wright, do not let yourself be forced into doing anything before you are ready. And again, later on, there's going to be an example at Sulphur Creek where these people are taking off one after the other, after each one of them barely makes it off the runway. Okay, now we'll look at flying in the backcountry, looking at terrain and canyon flying. So now with, you know, GPSs and, you know, really nice avionics, even the Garmin 430 has a terrain view, and ForeFlight and a lot of the, you know, handheld apps have terrain views, and they're just, you know, really awesome. So here, you know, you get into the where it's clear here. There's, you know, you're above, you're in good territory here. There's nothing to worry about. The red means that terrain is higher than you are. You don't want to go there. The yellow is, I believe, the way ForeFlight's set up is 500 feet above you is where the yellow will show. And that can be really helpful at times, especially maybe in low visibility and stuff when you're in a canyon, or even not. You can, you know, you can kind of watch that and see how your climb is. And I'll say, like, if you're coming down through here and trying to, you know, try to climb over and get over to here, if as you're going along, you know, you're getting less and less red, more and more yellow, and then even more and more clearing, then you can see that, yeah, maybe you're going to clear this ridge up here. But if not, then you want to make sure you know, maybe turn around, do a 180 and gain some altitude until all that red is gone. Okay, so we're looking at going down the canyon, and we talked a little bit in the weather part about the you know, the sun hitting on one side of the canyon, causing some thermal air rising, getting some lift. I gotta get this pointer changed here so you can see a little better. And the darker side here, you know, you might get into some sinking air, or maybe not sinking, but it's not going to climb. So, so the convention is to fly on the right side. But if you found yourself in sinking air, then you probably want to get over on the other side and get some lift. Now in this situation, it looks like the sun is shining on this part here too, so you might be okay if you just kept going straight, you know, and then you'd catch some thermals off here. Now in this illustration, if there was some wind coming in from the side, some canyon wind, then that might, you know, through the orographic action, mechanical action. The wind hitting this edge is going to create some lift. Over here, you might get some downdraft on this side. So, this is kind of hypothetical, but it does happen in real life. And then if there's more wind, you might get the reverse effect, where you're actually getting a downdraft over here and an updraft here, and that's because of some of the circulating, eddies and stuff you might get in this situation. But in the situation, if you find yourself in sinking air, then maybe get in the middle, or maybe go to the other side and try to find some rising air. The other thing with mountainous terrain, the horizon is tough to see what the actual horizon is. So if you're flying in rising terrain, there's a tendency to pitch up and follow the slope. Natural tendency. You don't want to run into anything, so you're going to tend to rise, but you need to watch your airspeed, and you don't want to get too slow, or you can stall. Then the opposite thing, if you're flying in lowering terrain, there's going to be a tendency to speed up and pitch down, and then that's going to increase your ground speed. It may increase your turn radius and could eat into your margin on as far as your turn radius goes. Then when you need it out, here's the 80-20 rule again, is to get slowed down. Maybe if there's weather ahead, and you're not sure what's ahead of you, clouds, rain, poor visibility, maybe smoke, get slowed down to assess the situation better. Maybe get slowed down and do a 180 and to get out of there. Or if you turn up the wrong canyon, a lot of times it's some of these drainages, you come to a fork, like kind of what's up ahead here, and you're not sure which way the main river's going. There might be a tributary coming in from one side, and it looks like maybe that's the way you go, but you could turn up and it could be a blind canyon. So if you get slowed down, the closer you get to a situation, an area like that, gives you more time to assess what's ahead. Sun in your eyes, boy, that's not fun. On east and west running runways, landing to the west in the evening, can really be a bad situation. Like for instance, Sulphur Creek. I did go in there one evening and the sun was setting, and it wasn't too bad until I got I don't know, about 50 foot down off the runway or from the runway, and man, then it was just blinding. So I learned a lesson there. You get in that situation and just wait it out. That happens even at Nampa on 2-9 sometimes. If 2-9's favored and the sun starts setting, it can be blinding. And even driving down the road sometimes, even this time of year, going east in the morning, boy, that sun can be really blinding. So yeah, be aware of that and just wait it out until it gets to a good angle and it's not going to be blinding. Turbulence, you want to slow down. Definitely in turbulence, you want to get down below maneuvering speed and maybe even slower. Or a ridge crossing is approaching, and you're not sure if there's going to be some turbulence or some downdrafts there. Get slowed down until you get closer to the ridge and see what's going on, and approach it like we said before at 45-degree angle, and then if everything is looking good, time you get to the ridge, go ahead and cross. But if not, do a 90 degrees and head out of there. Or if you're not familiar with an area. And the other thing is, most airstrips you go into, you want to get slowed down about that same configuration to check out the airstrip. Check it out a couple times. Nothing wrong with flying around at pattern altitude and making sure you can check out the winds and feel what the winds are doing, or look for any animals, or even the condition of the runway itself. And in some cases, where possible, you even do a low pass. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this. Which way is my out? So as far as you're flying along, and here it looks pretty clear that the main drainage goes this way, but there are some places where it's not that clear. It's almost like an equal split which way to go. So if you're not sure, then you can slow down. But here, always have an out. Like if you're starting to head up a blind canyon, and be able to turn around before you get too late and it gets too narrow and there's no room to turn around. So slowing down is going to help in that situation. So here's a canyon turn, example of a canyon turn at different speeds, different angles, bank angles. So say you're cruising along, in a canyon at 120 knots, which would be maybe a little fast for 182 in the canyons, but so a turn is going to take you, such and such a distance. In this case, it might put you in the side of the other canyon, in this example. But if you slow down to 80 knots and that same 30-degree bank, that'll, cut that turn radius in half. And then if you keep the same speed but do a 45-degree bank, that cuts that down even again in half. And you can go out and practice this, say out in the practice area or something, and find out what speed, what bank angle gets you in a safe position before stalling. And you can even play around with the speed and bank angle to where you start getting the stall horn to start just going off. And definitely want to be above that. But there's there's apps like Cloud Ahoy or ForeFlight and other tracking apps that you can go out and do these circles at different speeds, different angles, and then go back and see what your track was. It's kind of fun, actually. Here's another. This is out of Amy's book, and this is another kind of an example of how much bank, how much speed till you get close to stalling. So in this situation, I'm not sure what plane this would apply to. Maybe a 182. 65 knot, 45-degree bank. You're getting in a medium to high danger zone of stalling, or maybe a high danger zone. If you're at 80 degrees, 45-degree bank, then you're kind of in a medium, in this box here of risk of stalling. And then, at a higher speed and 45-degree bank, then, you're in a pretty safe zone. So this is, again, something you can go out and practice at altitude and find out what speed and what bank angle puts you in a safe zone. Okay, we're going to now look at some approaches and landings. Okay, yeah, I had to put this in because it's true. Landings are like farts. If you have to force one, it's probably crap. So, a good landing always starts in a pattern and maintaining the right airspeed consistently every time and getting set up every time. Sometimes in backcountry, there's not a chance to do a go around, but if there is, then that's when you want to do a go around. Or other cases, you need to know where your abort point is so that you can abort the landing before you commit to it. And yeah, so you don't want to force one into backcountry. It might turn out worse than crap. Here's some backcountry wisdom out of Sulphur Creek. Lodge, flying is the second greatest thrill known to man. Landing is the first. So I guess they say, if you can walk away from a landing, it's a good landing. But I'd like to do a little better than just walking away from one. Okay, approach. Things may look different once you get to your destination. So what I'm thinking about there is that you study everything, and maybe you look at some YouTube or things, but when you get there, like the video landing at the bee doing a go around, things look different in the actual situation. So again, slow down before entering your pattern, check it out, look at where your go around and abort point is. And you should have tried to figure this out before, when you're studying everything about the airport. Locate the approach and departure paths. So, again, you should have studied that before and tried to, figure it out. But as you're approaching, then, look even better on, okay, I'm going to be departing this direction, and this is what I need to do, where I need to turn, what the canyon looks like, and then the same on the approach. And again, if you can, make sure you assess things, assess the runway, the whole area before you commit to land, and even make 2 or 3 passes if you need to. Locate emergency landing spots, and that would be not just as you get to your destination, but as you're going along. But also, think ahead about, well, if I depart and I lose my engine, where am I going to go? So it's best to try to figure that out before that might happen than when it happens, if it happens for real. Look at the winds, the gradient, surrounding terrain, obstacles, runway surface conditions and hazards. And of course, once you get there, you want to look for animals, maybe other airplanes, equipment that might be in the area, somebody mowing the grass. And well, I mentioned this, do a couple of low passes if possible. This is up Moose Creek, and yeah, pretty regularly in the evenings there's going to be animals out. At Sulphur Creek, around dusk, they'll let the horses out, and there still could be situations where somebody's coming in the land in the late, or evening before it gets dark, or in the early morning. So be aware of that, especially in the mornings or in the late evenings. Landing. So you want to make a stable, constant speed, power approach. Pitch for speed, power for climb and descent. That's, everybody should know that. We talked about having a precise landing spot. So like in this example here, at Sulphur Creek, you can see where people land. And this was out of my Fly Idaho book. This time of year, this area gets soft here. And so you definitely want to stay centered. And as we'll see later, there's an airplane that landed and probably landed okay, but he didn't stay centered. And right about here, there's a ditch, and he went off to the side and ended up in the ditch. A lot of the gravel airstrips, the gravel works its way towards the edges and builds up a little, a little pillow or whatever you want to call it, along the edge, and you get into that gravel and it'll just pull you right over off the runway. So you definitely want to stay centered. But find your target landing spot, and that's the spot you need to hit. I mean, you don't want to be, well, in some cases it can be kind of rough. Even here at Sulphur Creek in this area, other strips it's rough, maybe at the beginning, and you definitely don't want to land too long, like that guy told you about before. So he probably touched down about here and then tried to go around and crash into the trees at the end here. Spot landings to the target spot. Keep centered, we talked about. And then once you're landed, taxi with caution, because there could be, chuck holes in there, gopher holes, rocks. Yeah, some of the strips like Warm Springs and Chamberlain, towards the end of the normal landing spot, there can be some pretty good gopher holes. Here's a 210 that landed at Sulphur Creek, landed short, supposedly into sinking air, because it is marshy out there and cooler on the approach. But this guy, had to be way short. I don't think he had an engine problem, but and on takeoff, actually there was 1 week where this plane there was a 182 that we'll see later that took off and in a tailwind and didn't have enough. I guess he didn't have his prop all the way in, and it was pretty well full loaded, and he took off and started to stall, and I guess stalled and came down and flipped over. We'll see that later, but yeah. So in this case, the probable cause was pilot's failure to maintain the proper rate of descent on short final. And its contributing factors were variable winds and swampy terrain. But he must have been way low, because even with some cooler air, and I've never ever felt much of a downdraft coming in there, especially when you're aiming for this touchdown point here instead of the end of the runway somewhere here. Okay, here's the one that I was telling you about that landed and got pulled off to the side and went into the ditch. Right about here is a ditch. There's a little stream that runs underneath, and there's a culvert here, but on either side of the runway there's a pretty good ditch, and yeah, he went off the left there and hit the ditch and took out his prop. So here we're going to see a takeoff, a landing, and I got this video from Amy Hoover. I forget who the pilot was, but he does a really good job of talking through, everything he's doing on his approach, looking for an abort point, checking out the runway, and yeah, he does a great job of talking through the whole thing.
Okay, so here we are at Thomas Creek. This is our second pass, looking for hazards, determining our abort point for takeoff, determining our route for takeoff, and then finally determining our touchdown point and our no-go around point for Thomas Creek. So here we are, left downwind. This is sped up. We're going to make a left base. Flaps are 40 degrees. Speed's about 65 as we turn on to final here. Trying to be extremely stable. Looking at that aim point in the windshield. We're going to slow it down here to normal speed. Everything's looking good. Going over the river, we're going to anticipate some sink. Ready with the power. Welcome to Thomas Creek.
Yeah, so you could see he came in with some power, and he was prepared to add a little power if he needed it, if he got into a sink coming over the river there, because the cooler air over the river, sometimes you'll get a little bit of sink there. Anyway, yeah, he did a great job of talking through the whole situation, and very nice landing. Now it looked like he was landing off center because that's just the camera position, how it was pointed and everything. But it looks like he was pretty much dead, dead on the runway. Okay. Okay, here's a look at landing at Cabin Creek, and it's kind of hard to show right now. Well, this is Cabin Creek, the airstrip here, and normally you come in. Let me get this thing, the laser pointer. Come in over this ridge, and you kind of make like a figure eight here, and you're checking out the winds, checking out, the airstrip, making sure everything's clear, and then you come back around over this ridge, and then you set up for your landing. So you can't see it, but Big Creek runs here. So as you're coming around on your base before you turn final, you've got an opportunity, if it doesn't look right, if you're too high or too low, to abort at that point and then go down Big Creek. Once you turn into final, you're pretty much committed then, and there is no go around. Okay, so I kind of talked through that. Okay, here we go. Tad and I again.
Get my feet warmed up here. Okay.
So I'm talking about getting my feet warmed up. I'm on the rudders and making sure they're off the brakes and getting them loose.
Go down here.
Oh my gosh, I see it. There's one airplane there.
Cabin Creek traffic, Skylane 91 X-ray. We're going to overfly the airstrip and check out the winds for landing.
Yeah, so here we are. Here's the, well, we're checking it out now. Yeah, there's another plane right down there.
The windsock is pretty calm. Maybe just a little bit of a
tailwind.
Yeah, just a little bit,
But not bad. Maybe 3 to 5 knots, I would say.
yeah.
Sometimes the windsock could be hanging, and it's just kind of hanging in one direction. There's a
Okay, we fly up over this little notch here.
but sometimes it may look like there's some wind when there's really not. That's what I'm trying to say.
42, so I want to be about 40. I want to be right about here when I cross this ridge and turn base. About 47, right about 500 feet over.
That's
Got 20 degrees of flaps in right now.
When I'm turning base here, it's like a circular base.
And you're at 85.
Just one turn base to final. It's not squared off, but I want to be
Come out
about
over here and
500
make
foot.
a right turn. Cabin Creek traffic, Skylane 91 X-ray, landing Cabin Creek.
500 foot above the runway. So here's your, here's the chance to abort.
30 degrees of flaps.
There's a big.
Or a little more than 20, actually.
So if it's not looking good right now, if I'm at the wrong altitude, then I can abort. But
And now you're going full flap.
I'm pretty much committed right now. Definitely committed
What's
now.
my speed?
You're pretty slow. You're 65, or you're 65. Yep. Now you're 70. You're stable at 70. Now you're 65. Nice stabilized approach. 65. 60. Oh, nice job, Jim. Holy cow.
Got that on video?
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, then AOP Air Safety has a real good section on flying the mountains, and this was a real story out of there where I went into Dewey Moore and crashed, and he talks all about it. This was in Donley. This was the first backcountry course I took. Well, no, it was the second one out of McCall. I was taking it from Lori McNichol. The first group that went out at 6 in the morning, the pilot was from California, and I guess he thought he was coming in too fast, and he added power to do go around, and the instructor could not get his hand off the throttle. He had one of those ratchet type throttles. You have to, like the mixture control, where you have to push a button to pull it out, and the instructor couldn't get his hand off, so he took off again, but he climbed up and then veered into a tree and hit a tree, and the plane caught on fire and burned up. Luckily, they were able to get out before it burned up, but they did get burned pretty bad. But there's a lot of cases of go-arounds that went bad, so you have to really worry about that. Watch for that. Okay, taking off. Make sure you can take off before you land. Most airstrips, most anywhere, you can land in a lot shorter distance than you can take off. So make sure you can, unless it's an emergency, make sure you can land before you take off. Make sure you can take off before you land. What's your departure route? What's your abort plan? What obstacles are in the way? What rate of climb do you need? What's your POH short field procedure? You want to be leaned for maximum performance. You're not sure, when you're taxiing from wherever you're parked, you want to make sure there's no rocks, chuck holes, things like that when you're taxiing. Do your calculations if you're not, confident. Locate, again, the 50% of the runway. Know your abort point. Know where your mixture needs to be set. Your flaps, where they need to be set. Most Cessnas, the optimum flap setting is when one aileron is down all the way. You get your flaps so it's parallel to that. It may not be matching it in the Cessnas, but get it parallel to the aileron all the way down, which is about 15, 18 degrees. Do a takeoff brief on your route, abort plan, obstacles, and then if there's a tailwind, the best wait. It depends on how much tailwind, because some of the strips are downslope pretty well, and you can take off safely in a tailwind. But there again, you need to know the unique properties of each place. Now, there's a neat little calculator from Sporty's. It's actually called a computer, where you can put in your temperature, put in your altitude, your pressure, altitude, the runway slope, whether you're taking off in a headwind or a tailwind, what the runway gradient is, if it's grass, turf, and the effective weight. What percent of gross weight are you? So I have one of these, and if anyone wants to, I mean, they're pretty simple to use. You just line up each bar. You know, like this is lined up for grass, then this is lined up for a slope uphill. This is lined up for a headwind, 5-knot headwind. Then it's about 95% of gross weight. And then once you come down, and depending on what your sea level takeoff distance is, so they have one marked for a 182 here. And in this situation, 620 feet at sea level. In this situation, it would be 15, 16, about 1,700 feet. And I've found this to be pretty safe, pretty conservative. If I'm really worried about if I can take off or not. Okay, here's a takeoff out of Thomas Creek, again with Tad.
Yeah, you can turn around here now, and this is kind of past the end of the runway. But if worse got to worse, you know, you could get on that road and do some sagebrush plowing.
What is our outside temperature, or do we have a?
Oh, it's OAT is
68 is all. Okay,
yeah.
All right.
Okay, flaps set, primer. I think mixture good. All flaps up, trim.
Okay.
Got your trim for. All right. Okay, then take off, you know, straight out, and if you can't out-climb that ridge, just barrel a little to the left, and a little bit more back pressure. There. Then once you're off, stay in ground effect.
I kind of want to get over these trees before I bring my flaps up.
Yeah, you want to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good comment. You definitely don't want to put your flaps up too soon because you're going to lose a little altitude. And you know, make sure you're safely cleared, you know, any obstacles before you put your flaps up. That was a nice takeoff. Okay, here's one found somewhere on the AOPA slides when I did that presentation up in Canada. And one thing to note right now is, you know, he's taken off here, and it's hard to see how much runway is left back here, but he's definitely not using as much runway as he could. And you'll see why in a second.
Hello. Woohoo! Shit!
So was that guy lucky or what? Yeah, the altitude, I don't know what the temperature was. The altitude is not too high there, 1,800 feet, but yeah, that looked pretty tense. Okay, now we're going to see some at Sulphur Creek. Let me tell you a little bit about Sulphur Creek here if you don't know. There's a windsock right about here, and this, you take off from this end, you take off this direction, and like I said earlier, the winds usually start picking up there, you know, 11 o'clock or so, maybe sooner, a little bit later, but they generally start picking up pretty good. The thing about it is, you know, the windsock may be only indicating, you know, 5 to 10, 7 or 8 knots, not too much of a tailwind. It would be a tailwind. Um, and up here, you might not hardly feel anything. But you get down here at the runway, this runway is sloped up this way, so it's quite a bit higher up here than down here. And the wind's coming down this direction, so the trees and the terrain, they block the wind. So the windsock may be showing, say 5 to 7 knots. You get down here at the end of the runway, and it could be 15, 20 knots. Okay, so in this, what you're about to see is these guys, they're, I guess, a flying club that was from around Reno. They were at Johnson Creek, and they came in for breakfast, and I believe it's around noon when they're, got some notes here, when they're taking off. And the leader, I guess as a flight instructor, was pretty, pretty macho guy. So, and they were actually asked if they're going to actually take off in this kind of a wind, but apparently they ignored whoever asked them. There was an airline pilot that actually captured this video. There's 4 planes here. They take off after each other. There were 2 more that followed it. So they're like, they're like lemmings. It's like, you'd think after the first one, you'll see here that, the other ones would, have second thoughts. But like Forrest Gump used to says, stupid is as stupid does. You see the windsock is not showing much wind right now. It's right there. Well, he made it.
That's the guy I was worried about. That's the one that got 160 horsepower. He's still barely climbing.
Now, what the heck? He made it. I can make it.
Nice tailwind takeoff. Well, it's taking off into frickin' tailwind. He's in a frickin' 180. He's having a hard enough time. Look at that crosswind.
This next guy, listen, he's doing a run-up on the gravel. I hate to see his prop.
Tailwind just picked up.
Holding his brakes, doing a run-up.
Oh my God, look at that. Look at that, look at that. You might be getting a weenie roast. Every now and then that tailwind picks up, and it's quite a gust. You get that at the wrong time. If I was this guy, I would stay. We're not doing this tomorrow. That's why we're out of here by 8:30. 8 o'clock.
No.
She was waiting for the tailwind to die down. Watching. He's off the runway. He's in the grass. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on. Okay. Yeah, I guess he's got it.
Charlie, what are these people doing?
This is what gives general aviation a bad name.
This is horrible.
That's what I'm saying. I said they're really not going to go take off right now, are they?
Yeah, so there were two more, I think, that went after him. The timestamp on the video was at noon, and the density altitude at that time was 8,000 feet. So, now this was not one of those. This was actually one of the planes that crashed the same week as the one that landed short. And he took off, apparently did not have his prop all the way in, maybe mixture was not set properly, and also there was a tailwind. NTSB is improper setting of prop controls, contributing factor, high density, altitude, and tailwind. Swampy terrain didn't have nothing to do with it. Maybe it caused it to flip over, but anyway, the eyewitnesses said that he was off the ground, then he just pulled it back into a stall and it flipped over. Nobody was hurt, fortunately. And either one of those, that 210 that landed short or this one. There was one last summer, I think it was a 210 or 182 came in and landed hot, landed way long and tried to do a go around and hit the trees, and he was burned pretty severely too, but he lived. And the plane was burned up. Okay, here's a good short field takeoff. That was at 172 that went in the ditch. We happened to be up there when that happened, and also when they hauled it out with a helicopter. That was pretty fun to watch. I'll just talk just a little about survival, not too much. Survival is what you're wearing. So don't count on, having a survival and first aid kit or something tucked under your seat. It's what you're wearing to survive the crash. So, most of us that fly the backcountry have a vest of some sort. I just have a fishing vest that I've got packed full of stuff. First aid, know how to do first aid, how to use the first aid. Red Cross first aid course would be a good thing to take. Dress appropriately. Geez, there was one over in the near Silver City a few years ago. Well, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. They came from California and they're going to Mountain Home, and they were dressed in their warm summer clothes in the middle of the winter and crashed, and they survived. Luckily, they got cell phone service and got a hold of someone, but they were in a downdraft or an ice storm and iced up and crashed. No survival skills. Consider taking a wilderness or a first aid medicine training course. So here's just a few things. There's lots of lists of what you could have in a survival kit. A good hat would be definitely one thing. So a knife, paracord, tourniquet, water, definitely water. You can live a long time with just water. And some sort of a shelter. Also, it's really handy to have a satellite tracking device like a Spot or an InReach. You're able to text now. In fact, I've got an InReach Mini, and I can text and get weather with it. I can text and call people up. In fact, I was up at Moose Creek one time, and I got a hold of Roland and asked Roland what the weather was like, and decided to come back a day early because it was moving in faster than was forecast. Then, a satellite phone would be ideal, but now with the with the spot and the inReach, you can text people. Not only that, I mean, it tracks your flight, and it has emergency SOS buttons on it, both of them. There's a subscription. So the other alternative is a PLB, a personal locator beacon, and those there's no subscription, but it's on 406 megahertz, same as our ELTs, and you set that off, and it goes to the same service as our ELTs, emergency service. With the spot or the inReach, you can have other people on there too, besides search and rescue, that you can get a hold of in case of emergency. So here are some of the resources. Like I said before, the Fly Idaho book, Gail and Hanselman's book, and then Amy Hoover and Dick Williams, the Canyon Fly-In. Also, I guess the original, or the Flying Backcountry Bible was Sparky Imerson, and that's an excellent book too, and has a lot of good information. So here are some links to these. The RAF, Recreational Aviation Foundation, Idaho Aviation Association. Now, to use the Idaho Aviation Association features now, like the webcams and pilot reports, and you can get on there 3 times for free, but after that you have to be a member, and it's, I think, like $50 a year or something, so it's it's cheap. Amy Hoover's guide, Sparky Imerson's, that's his webpage. Division of Aeronautics, Lori McNichol and Mountain Canyon Flying. There's the web for the supercub.org, and they've got a ton of great presentations. I mean, Dick Williams is on there. Bill McGlynn, who's the president of RAF, he talks about the RAF, and there's numerous presentations. I guess that's the one good thing that COVID, we're getting a lot of good material, out of people coming up with other means of doing things. And then AOPA, they have a lot of good stuff, and they have one link that's dedicated to flying in the mountains, and a lot of good information on that too. So some takeaways, hopefully. Be proficient, practice, understand density, altitude, know yourself and your airplane's performance capabilities, know the terrain and the airports that you're going into, understand and respect the weather and the winds, and seek qualified instruction. Have a survival kit, be safe, and have fun. So that's it, and I'll open this up now for questions, and those are a couple of my grandkids. That was a few years ago. They've grown up quite a bit. Okay, so
Yeah.
let me stop this share thing. Okay. Questions?
Jim, I wanted to say something, just underline what you said and what Ivan said. I used to fly for 17 years in the jungle. I flew into, you'd call them class 2, class 3, and class 4 trips. Did that every day. And we had 130 some strips, and it took us over 2 years to get checked out on all of them if everything went right. And if we went on a week's vacation, we had to, you felt just off when you came back on, the next Monday. And so currency is really important, and good instruction is really important. And just because you could do it once and you remember doing it well doesn't mean you can do it now. There's a lot of science, but there's also a lot of skill, and it's muscle memory and judgment, and that only comes with practice and currency. So I just wanted to underline that, what both you and Ivan were saying, that you have to get a good checkout and you got to stay current.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks.
Hey, Jim, this is John. I have a question for you and Jim and anybody else that's been doing this for a while. For us folks that are new to the backcountry, the that example at Sulphur Creek is fairly terrifying. The lemurs, as you called it. What advice, or have you guys ever been in that situation where you see one person take off and barely make it? And are there advice for some of us less experienced folks for how to empower ourselves to speak up and tell the next three idiots to stop and enjoy lunch and dinner at Sulphur Creek instead of just breakfast?
Yeah, Amy Hoover talks about that one situation she had, and I mean it wasn't exactly the same, but similar. And she just asked him lots of questions. You know, say, you know, like, well, what do you think's gonna, what do you think would happen? You know, if you took off and with this tailwind and you're not going to climb out. And so she didn't say all the questions she asked them, but you know, she asked them several questions, and that's it. They were at Indian Creek, and that situation they decided to stay and you know hike and wait till the winds calm down. Um, I've been at Sulphur Creek in that situation, and I know John Baglian and maybe there are a few others have too. And hey, man, just stay there and have dinner and you know hang out and wait till the wind dies down. There's sometimes it doesn't. Um, I was at Upper Loon one time and it was pretty near 9:30 at night. It was still light, but not too light before it died down. I was just about ready to figure on spending the night, but yeah. So and it's not just the winds. There's other situations. You know, you um, smoke. There's
Um, Jim,
go ahead, James. Yeah,
Jim, this is James Patterson.
yeah,
Can I offer an answer to Josh's question also?
yeah.
I think one of the answers there is same question your parents would give you about peer pressure, or similar to that, and that is fly your own flight. If you're feeling uncomfortable about something, then take a moment to be deliberate about evaluating your capability, not the other pilot's capability.
Yeah.
And also reviewing your performance numbers. And if it still feels like it's on the margins of your comfort threshold, don't go, and don't be pressured in to doing something like that. Um, and here, John will know, but some other people here on the call will know. There's some other pilots that we know. Matt Conklin is the one I'm referring to here. Um, he's a better pilot than I am, and when he when he goes and does something, it's probably not within the realm of my capability, and I might not be comfortable with it. And so I've learned, I observe and I appreciate, but I don't follow because it's going to be out of my capability zone. So fly your own flight, evaluate your skills, evaluate your aircraft. If you don't feel good about it, don't do it. Don't be pressured into doing it.
And James, I agree. This is Ivan. Like I've said many times, and I learned this, from an instructor, and I had it reiterated to me over the last 35 plus years. And I try to teach all my students, and I still live that way, the conservative response rule, which is in essence exactly what you're saying. And I've said it at many meetings already. If there's any doubt in your mind at all about the weather, the maintenance of the airplane, your personal abilities that day, maybe you're not feeling good, maybe your wife kicked you in the balls before you left the house, who knows, if you're just not doing it, conservative response rules. If there's any doubt, there is no doubt. Do it another time, stay longer, do whatever. But if you're getting a doubt, that means you're probably smart enough to be thinking that you have doubts. So
Another
I
pilot
couldn't agree
friend,
with you more. There's no shame in aborting a mission. Just like Jim said, he's done it many times in the backcountry, so have I. Just like a go around is sometimes a successful end to an approach, So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just be honest with yourself and don't try to let the ego get in the way, which is hard to say because we're pilots and we have big egos sometimes. But yeah, those are good words. Don't take a chance if you think there is a chance.
there's kind of a funny method to this, and I'm not advocating this. I'm just sharing it as a point of reference for the point. And that is another pilot that I know keeps what he calls an emergency beer in his airplane. And if he sees in a situation like that, that looks like it may not be okay, he just grabs the beer and drinks it. And that solves the problem for 8 hours.
I love it.
Yeah, well, sometimes though that beer might give you extra courage, and then you'll go. That could be a backfire.
Yeah.
Well, the point being that if he reaches for the beer, he knows he's staying on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate, Jim, your example with Amy, because I just think that that's something that we can all be better at, you know, calling each other out if we see something, even if we don't know the person in the other airplane. If we see something that doesn't look smart, bringing it up in a non-threatening way like Amy described is super wise, because half of these people are all single pilot out there, so they're relying on all of us, I guess, to kind of do CRM and remind them if they're being a dumbass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, quick question for Jim, I guess, and all the other experienced backcountry pilots. And I know I have to do some more practicing this spring here before level 2 and all that, and some more instruction and everything. But I understand about being conservative and all that, but do you have any recommendations about, like, you know, when you have a buffer on a runway, you do your calculations, and I don't know, just say it says 2,000 feet. Do you double that at gross weight? Just a rough idea of, okay, as a starting point until you get more experience in that. Does that make sense? I've always done level 1 and they're pretty long, and
Yeah.
you know, I'm never near gross weight.
Well, I'd say, you know, I mean, you can practice that at Nampa, or, you know, go to another strip where you know you've got a lot of margin and figure out what it should be. Figure out your takeoff distance and your rate of climb, and then go out and see what you do.
Okay.
I think he's asking a little bit about margin in terms of, like, I know that in my plane, I'm almost always off the ground in 800 feet, but that doesn't mean I'm going to land at a 1,000-foot dirt strip. That is just not in the cards for me. My personal limit is about 1,900 feet on a dirt strip, and that's not at 7,000 feet. You know, so I want to have enough space in front of me that I can reach that 70% of rotation speed at the 50% mark. I don't want to be planning on rotating at 90% of the runway.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I see.
And you know, Dave, for those numbers, I use 75% just because I'm a caveman, and it's easy for my brain to calculate that set of stuff. So if rotation speed is at 60, half of that is 30, half of that's 15, that's 45, right?
Right.
And I can figure that out a little bit easier. In my brain, I can't figure out 70, 71. So I go 75, which is a quick calculation and a little more conservative.
And a little more conservative,
yeah. But I'm with Jim, man. I've done that too before in the backcountry, where I've kind of paced it out and pick a tree and put that in my mind.
Yeah.
And you know, when I think it's going to be tight, you know, it's worth the extra time. So that was a good example you gave, Jim. So no, I agree with you, Dave. You really have to know your airplane, and you know, Chris, take it out there and practice on some of those longer places, and you know, so you get it comfortable in your mind what it can do. That's great advice.
And it's a good time for a plug for that computer that Jim showed. I have one of those I keep in my bag also, and I can share a quick experience that I had at Smiley Creek. I stopped in Smiley Creek with my family, had breakfast, came back across. When we landed, there were a couple of guys parked next to where we parked. They were camping, and when we got back, there was a third guy, and they were all packed up and getting in the believe it to be a 172, and yeah, it's getting towards 11 probably, and I just told my family I need about 10 minutes to look things over in terms of a little math. So I started doing all my math, and I was confident that I was going to be off the ground in half the runway. And they said, so should we go now? And at that point, the other guys had taxied out, and I just said, let's just give this a few minutes to see how this plays out. And they used every inch of that runway, and everybody looked at me and said, "We're not going to do that, are we?" and I could tell them with confidence, because I had done all of that math and used that computer as well as compared it to my POH, that no, that wasn't going to be the case. Told them where we would be off the ground, and I delivered, and it made everybody relieved and happy. So yeah.
I have one of those computers as well, Dave, and it works great. It's like 20 something bucks. It's like a old fashioned slide rule.
Yeah.
And it works good.
It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's a fantastic tool.
But it works.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's 27, 28 bucks. I looked and it's still the same price, so yeah.
Worth it.
But I think John's question too, if you see somebody that's going to be doing something stupid, how do you approach them? And that's what Amy was talking about, ask them some questions. And I know I saw someone do something stupid after it was after the fact. That was at the Flying Bee, and I was actually coming back from fishing, and they came up and landed just straight in. Didn't fly over. They didn't check nothing. They didn't check the runway, and it was some gal in like a 170 or something, and she was just putting around. But she said, and I saw her at lunch, and I said, have you ever been here before? And she says, no, it's the first time. And I says, well, you didn't even, don't you think you should have flown over and checked the runway out and checked the winds and stuff? And she says, oh, geez, I never thought about that. So it's like, holy cow, But yeah. Anyway.
So you're nicer than me. If I think somebody's gonna do something stupid, I'd probably be like, hey man, do you want to die today?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, she'd already done it, I said,
oh yeah,
saw this plane come in, and but yeah, maybe the next place she goes, she'll think a little bit. Yeah, anybody else?
I would just say thanks.
A nice trick from that pilot that James was talking about, Conklin, taught me. That's nice for everybody to keep in your back pocket. If you've got multiple people in your plane, we all like flying in the backcountry. If you need some more margin, then you tell your buddies. In Dave's situation, where you're calculating your takeoff performance, you get better performance with less weight. So you can just make a couple of hops. So I'll take you individually and I'll drop you off at Sulphur Creek, and then I'll come back and pick you up here, and then I'll take the next person. So you can get more takeoffs and landings.
Yeah. Yeah, like that guy at Bruce Meadows. I mean, he had 3 people in there.
Yeah, he should have taken them one by one out to Chalice or something, and he could top off his tanks, and he would have been a hell of a lot safer. He wouldn't have hurt anybody, and he would have gotten 3 more takeoffs and landings in his logbook.
Yeah.
Perfect. But it's easy to forget. I once had I had done my math, and I was safe to take off at Smiley Creek too. But that was the first day that I was like, oh man, this density altitude thing is really real. I had my spot that I paced off and I rotated by it, but it kind of made me sweat. So I took 3 hops afterwards, and it was easier with only 1 passenger.
That's where it comes to life, where you really understand it.
Well, John, a lot of times we'd be going into villages, and everybody wants to send all their cargo out, and so what they thought was kind of their final argument or their final persuasion, they'd say, well, Capitan Carlos, he takes that much weight and more out. And I'd say, oh, I understand that. He's a much better pilot than I am.
Well, Jim, I walk away with a good refresher every year that I watch this, and I appreciate it very much. It always gives me some things to reflect on.
Yeah, well, good. That's what, me too. I mean, it's a good refresher for me too. So, And usually you learn something. When I did those AOPA seminars, people ask me questions I never have been asked before. And, like, well, how do you lean when you're not supposed to do a run up, and things like that. And because they're never, like some of the flatlanders, they're never used to leaning, and so, yeah, always things to learn.
Yep.
I could go on, and probably many of you too could go on for hours on things stupid things we did that we'll never do again. Well, anyway, well, I guess no more questions then. We'll call it a night and see everyone in a week.